Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today Lincoln Riley is still catching strays for leaving Oklahoma to become the head coach at USC. But this time it is from Oklahoma's athletic director, Joe Staglione. He was on the SEC network talking about Oklahoma and Texas officially being members of the SEC, and he took this not so subtle shot at Lincoln Riley. We'll play this clip and then we'll come back and we'll discuss it.
I will tell you without reservation, every coach that we talked to was excited. And you know what? The ones that weren't aren't here anymore.
It's
Take it away, Dart.
Listen.
We call that a mic drop.
Yeah. And when you're in this league, you can mic drop a little bit.
Wow, he just straight up dunked on Lincoln Riley right there. We all know who he's talking about. He's talking about Lincoln Riley because to refresh everyone's memory, in 2021, July 2021, the decision comes out from Oklahoma and Texas that they are going to leave the Big 12 and join the SEC. And then in about 6 months later or so, Lincoln Riley is like, deuces, I'm headed to Southern California and USC. So I wanted to talk about that decision a little bit here because I do think Lincoln Riley in a way, in some ways I think it's fair. In other ways, I think it's a little unfair that the SEC people kind of like paint this picture of Lincoln Riley basically when he heard the decision that Oklahoma's going to the SEC, where Lincoln Riley is just sitting in a corner and he's crying. He's like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to beat Kentucky. I don't know how I'll beat a dysfunctional Texas A&M or dysfunctional Florida. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I think if he went to the SEC, I think he could have done just fine. I do think he would have had to come to the realization that it looks like he came to the realization now at USC where he needs to build out his team and build out his defense a lot differently than he was at Oklahoma and how he was the first 2 years at USC. But with that being said, though, I don't necessarily blame him for the move because Lincoln Riley going and being the head coach of Oklahoma in the SEC is a lot more different and a lot more difficult of a job than it is being the head coach of Oklahoma in the Big 12 because you're all of a sudden not the top dog of that conference anymore. And that's why Lincoln Riley decided to go to USC because he wanted to be, the top dog in the Pac-12. He wanted to become the premier college football program on the West Coast. And if they're going to be paying you a bunch of money, you have this chance to revive this dead college football program. You really don't have like any ties to Oklahoma. He was like an assistant there for like 2 years, 1 or 2 years under Bob Stoops before he actually took over to become the head job at Oklahoma. So I don't necessarily blame Lincoln Riley for making the move. And to say that he was scared to compete against the SEC, I just don't think that's true because if you're going to be at USC, your standard is still to win national titles, right? And you're still going to have to compete against the same people for the same type of recruits. And you're still going to have to compete against these teams if you make college football playoff. So I don't necessarily think that that means he was scared. But I understand if you're an SEC fan, if that's what you wanted to say and that's what you believe. And I understand if you're an Oklahoma fan, if you're mad at Lincoln Riley and are always going to hold a grudge against him. I do not blame you whatsoever on that. I would probably do the same thing if I was an Oklahoma fan. But I want to talk about Oklahoma in the SEC, and I want to talk about their new reality because this is the reality that they wanted. And this new reality, it's a lot tougher to compete perennially in the SEC for national titles and for SEC championships than it is in the Big 12 when you're Oklahoma. Because if you're in the SEC, there's like at least 8 to 9 programs that genuinely, if you maybe can make the argument for like 10, that genuinely believe that they can compete for national titles and that they think they should be a national title type of football program. And if you're looking at Oklahoma just at this season and where they kind of stack up with everyone else in the conference, if you're looking at all of the season preview stuff, they're kind of middle of the road. I saw some that had them like down at 9. I had others that had them kind of in that like 5 to 7 range. And if you're Oklahoma too, on top of that, they got handed what most people are saying is the hardest SEC schedule. Not the hardest schedule out of any SEC teams because like Florida, for example, has to play like Miami and Florida State. And I think UCF too. out of conference. But if you're looking at Oklahoma, they only gave you guys 3 home SEC games. You have the neutral site game at Texas, and one of those home games is Alabama, by the way. You have to go on the road to LSU, at Missouri, at Ole Miss, and at Auburn. Another home game is Tennessee, by the way. That's a tough, tough schedule. There is a world where this Oklahoma team could go like 7-5, 6-6, maybe worst case scenario. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to Oklahoma fans about is now I'm not trying to say that like that's going to be your reality and that's what you guys are going to be every year. And I understand that Brent Venables is building something, but if you guys actually believe in Brent Venables and you actually believe the things that you guys are saying about how he is recruiting and how he is developing players in house right now, be patient. Be patient because as someone that has talked to a lot of these SEC people and has listened to how they describe their head coaches when they fire them and the reasons why they fire them. I feel like a lot of these SEC teams and a lot of these SEC fan bases force their teams to fire their head coaches way prematurely or something, and I've listened to them talk about the reasons that they fire their head coaches, and when they explain it to me, I'm like, okay, I understand it a little bit more. I might not agree with it, but I understand it a little bit more. But if you're Oklahoma and you might have a rough year 1 or maybe even year 2 in the SEC, don't panic and fire Brett Venables. Now I understand it makes it a little harder, the fact that you guys gave him an extension recently, but don't panic fire him. That is the one thing I'm saying to Oklahoma fans. Do not panic fire Brent Venables, because the last thing you want to be if you are Oklahoma, you don't want to be one of these SEC teams like Florida that is basically just pumping out a new coach every 3 years, or what Tennessee was before they got Josh Heupel. You do not want to end up in that thing, because once you become into that cycle and you're firing head coaches every 3 years, and it's farther and farther away from the time that you guys were actually competing for national championships and conference championships, that Oklahoma job that you guys, are so mad at Lincoln Riley for leaving because you guys think it's so prestigious, it becomes less and less prestigious to the new head coaching candidates. Again, this happened with Florida recently, where Florida, they fire Dan Mullen. And guys, go back to that. I believe was it the 2021 season? Yeah, it was the 2021 season. Go back and read and listen to what people were saying about Dan Mullen after the Alabama game that year. I believe it was like week 2 or week 3 for them. People are basically saying Dan Mullen coached the best game of his career against Alabama in a loss because of the run schemes that he was using to dice up Alabama's defense. It was like a close loss. And then like 3 months later, it's like, this guy's an idiot. He sucks at recruiting. Let's fire him. You don't want to be in that situation. Then it's like and this is the thought process of Florida and some of these other SEC schools. It's like they fire, Dan Mullen. They're like, all right, we are Florida and we are looking for a head coach. Who wouldn't want to become our head coach? And they're kind of looking around and they're like, our first few options said no. Ooh, they're not interested. I guess we'll get Billy Napier. Like, Billy Napier was not their first choice. He was not their first choice. So if you're Oklahoma, you do not want to be in that situation. So if you actually believe in Brent Venables, if you actually believe how he's building the team, I was listening to an Oklahoma podcast today talking about how they're a thing with like Lincoln Riley, or even when Brent Venables first took over, they didn't have that many big guys. And now they're getting a bunch of guys over 290, over that 300 mark. And they're getting, they're going to be able to have a little bit more of a force on the line than they were definitely in Brent Venables' first year. So if you're an Oklahoma fan, be patient. That is my belief of how you have success in this conference. You have to be patient when other teams are going to be constantly firing their coaches after, because at least this first year or two, like, I don't think you guys are going 10-2 this year. I don't think, there's a good chance you guys might be going 6-6 or 7-5. And that's a whole new reality for Oklahoma if you look at their history, where they're usually, I think Lincoln Riley won like 4 or 5 straight Big 12 titles. Bob Stoops was mostly winning 10, 11 games a year, and this is the stuff that when you join this conference, and especially when you have the schedule variance where you might just be playing 4 top 10 teams a year, you might be having more 8-4 seasons than usual. So that's my advice to Oklahoma fans. And again, that's just my philosophy. That's kind of my thoughts. There you have it, guys. That's going to do it for this episode here today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. please hit that subscribe button. Those are the best things that you can do to help small channels like this grow and help us out in the algorithm. So if you like this, please hit that subscribe button, hit like. I'd very much appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.